Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, we have the privilege of talking with Dr. Rhea Holler and Dr. Rachel Stewart. We'll dive into a range of topics, including the intersection of coaching and mental health, the importance of and practicals of self-care and attention to burnout, and how the mind affects performance, and also how all of that relates to relationship with God. We've also created space at the end for Dr. Holler and Dr. Stewart to answer the questions that you coaches have submitted. So thank you for submitting those. I'm really excited to hear their responses. I do have to say this interview is long, but I want to encourage you that you don't want to miss it. It's so good that Rhea and Rachel provide so much valuable insight. They're such valuable resources for us and just people that I'm excited to introduce you guys to. So I can't wait to dive in. To start, I want to give you guys a little bit of an intro for them. They have really impressive resumes, so I'll read those for you now. So Dr. Rhea Holler, who is normally for most of the interview in the top portion of the screen, she specializes in trauma, integration of spirituality, and helping people build a life worth living. She obtained her degrees from East Tennessee State and Azusa Pacific University, completing her postdoctoral fellowship at Harbor-UCLA Medical Center in Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, CBT, and Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, DBT. She developed the DBT-ACES program at Harbor-UCLA, the DBT program for veterans at the Long Beach, now Tibor Rubin VA, and then co-founded Harbor CBT in 2018. Dr. Holler provides professional trainings focusing on the burnout prevention strategies that help those in leadership take care of themselves. Her mission is to help people drag themselves out of spiritual, emotional, and material poverty so they can go free someone else. Rhea didn't mention this in her bio, but she also has a history of being involved in athletics and playing Division I collegiate softball. For Dr. Rachel Stewart, she's born and raised in Southern California. Dr. Rachel Stewart is a clinical psychologist with expertise in mood disorders, anxiety, trauma, and PTSD, sports psychology, and performance. She has a bachelor's degree in both psychology and communication studies from UCLA and a PhD in counseling psychology from Washington State University. Highlights of her career include working with sports psychologist Dr. Scanlon at the International Center for Talent Development, producing the Young Turks radio show, interning at the National Center for PTSD Executive Division, completing a specialized fellowship in women's mental health and PTSD, and providing trainings for Southern California Police Departments. She co-founded Triangle Services Consulting, a boutique practice providing direct clinical and coaching services, supervision and consulting for individuals and large agencies, trainings, and education. She is a former competitive swimmer and triathlete, a 200-hour registered yoga teacher, and a mom to a kindergartner, a cat, and a 1-year-old bulldog. So yeah, both of these women have such impressive resumes and experience, but they're also just really fun to be around and fun to learn from. So I hope you enjoy the interview. So, hi, Rhea and Rachel again. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. As you know, we have a group of 25 plus amazing college coaches from around the country, college volleyball coaches, who are really eager to learn and to lead with God. And I'm so excited to connect them with you guys. We've gotten to know each other a little bit over the past few months, and I think it's just a really sweet opportunity to hear from you, to learn from you, and to learn together. So to start, I just read your bios, and you guys obviously have long, impressive academic and professional experience, but you both have also athletic experience, which is pretty fun. So would love to hear from you why you're willing to talk to this group and want to share with these coaches. So yeah, Rhea and Rachel, if you wouldn't mind chiming in there.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having us, first of all. Yeah. I'm sure your coaches are really busy, so it's really amazing that they're willing to kind of seek out more education on top of everything they're already doing. Mm-hmm. I was in sports from 12 until 23, so 22, 23. So I played softball, volleyball, track. I played softball in college at East Tennessee State, and coaches really do make or break the situation, especially if your home base is a little bit rocky or there's stuff going on there. Coaches can save you from something, and they can sort of protect you from going certain ways in your younger years, and they can also unfortunately be harmful. For me, I had really good experience with my coaches. I had one really tough experience in college, and that coach was replaced by a good coach. And so it was really, really apparent at 19 and 20, like how the emotional health of a coach really set the tone for my experience in college. So based on that experience, I'm really interested in any coach that's out there looking for any advice on psychology, psychological mindedness, performance, injury prevention, anything. Because often people put in leadership positions just kind of like take the power and run with it. So it's just really fun to talk about like leading in that God-centered way while integrating what we know in psychology and not thinking that those two things are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Rhea. Yeah, Rachel, what about you? What stands out for you?
Well, you know, I started my psychology career to be able to work with athletes. I come from, you know, a really athletic family. My brother was a professional athlete. I had some career-ending injuries, and, you know, I was a competitive swimmer with a kind of crappy coach, and then learned the value of good coaching through a lot of other just sport and athletic participation and just kind of everything you could name. And, you know, I really love athletes. I always wanted to work with them. You know, I believe that performance runs the gamut. Like, I believe, you know, coaches are performing in a way when they're leading, and, you know, business executives are performing. And so I love to be able to help people be better performers and better leaders. And I think that, you know, God gives us a great example of doing that. And I'm particularly sensitive to trying to create a system and an environment and a team and culture that really protects people and helps them not just live their best life, but reach their best potentials in everything, you know, their sport and their career and their future, so that they can go forward and, you know, have that, you know, we call it in psychology to live a values-based life. And, you know, spiritually, that's like living a God-centered life. And so I'm just excited to, you know, be able to talk to people who want to achieve the same thing.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, well, I'm so grateful for you guys and also your perspective that it's coming from faith-based perspective. I think knowing that we all are going after the same thing, like you said, we all want to partner with God, and have that inform the way we operate, is so cool to now, all learn from one another. So today would love, based on some of your experience and expertise, would love to ask each of you some questions. So maybe Rhea, we'll start with you, and then Rachel, would love for you to chime in as well, if there's things that come up. And then I'll also ask you some more targeted questions. So would love to hear from you, Rhea. How do coaches take care of themselves? We know they have such a busy schedule and so many responsibilities. So how do they take care of themselves with all of that going on?
Oh, that's so hard. I mean, I think a lot of coaching systems, I think a lot of people think coaches are sort of like the head pastor, and really coaches are like the Sunday school teacher. They're like in the back, making the copies, making the cookies, doing everything on their own. And, you know, doing this really important work that should be paid more, have more support, given more resources. But often, in my experience at least, unless you're talking about the rarefied air of the 5% of coaches that have all those resources because they generate a lot of money, most coaches are really being asked to wear like 5, 6, 7 hats. And so the first thing I would say is just acknowledge when you are being asked to do too much, because the system will try to kind of gaslight you. You know, the AD will be friendly. People will be like, yeah, well, the soccer coach does it like this too. You will be the van driver. You'll be the nutritionist. You'll be the counselor. You'll be the, you know, if you get an assistant coach, that's lovely, but then that quickly gets overwhelmed too. So just acknowledge if you are in a situation that is in line with your values and you are feeling fatigue. There's burnout and there's compassion fatigue, but there's also compassion satisfaction. So you could be working in, you know, up to your waist in mud in the middle of Haiti, but you're doing something you want to do. And so it really protects you against burnout. So we have these two scales, compassion fatigue and burnout, and sometimes vicarious trauma if something, God forbid, but if something goes wrong, you witness something, there's a car accident, something on the job goes wrong. So this is the basket of things that could go wrong in your career. And then you have compassion satisfaction. This is the sort of like, I'm doing things that are hard. I'm driving all day. I'm taking these girls in and out of restaurants and doing all these things and enforcing curfew. But this is what I wanted to do with my life. So I'm really happy to do it. And you'll see that, you know, if you're living this sort of mindful life where you're checking in on your own balance on those two scales, then you're looking to see, like, am I getting burned out? Am I getting cynical? Am I getting sarcastic? Am I getting short? I don't want to hear, am I getting eye rolly to the, you know, the kids when they cry, to the athletes when they're having a hard time? Am I hearing a sharp tone come out of my voice? Well, sometimes when you're a Christian, you experience that stuff and you just kind of want to push it away. Oh, I messed up. I don't want to mess up. I'll do better tomorrow. But we really want to encourage you to, instead of pushing it away, really look at it curiously in this non-judgmental way where you're not, you know, falling into condemnation because you messed up. You're not asking yourself to white knuckle it and pull yourself up by your bootstraps without God's grace, but really look at it as like a normal reaction to probably a systemic failure of you. If you're in a school that's really supportive of you and you don't experience this, that's wonderful. I'm just speaking in broad terms. Typically, coaches are underpaid and overworked. And that's if you get paid. So like that's, you know, interns aren't even intern positions. You should feel lucky to have them. Well, okay, that's a cognitive intellectual reality, but at the same time, your body might start getting tired. And you really want to look for the big signs of burnout, which are fatigue, physical dread. You wake up in the morning and you have the thought, I can't do this another day. Depression. Sometimes it manifests as anxiety and worry and panic attacks because you're juggling too much. And possibly so much stress that you stop getting that compassion, satisfaction, values-driven sense of mastery out of what you're doing, and you start to just really dread it. And you're like, what did I get myself into? I don't know if I can do this anymore. And the natural reaction to that is to suppress, repress, and deny and banish those feelings. But as therapists and psychologists, we really want you to look at them and make sure that you self-validate that they make a lot of sense. So that's step one. You have to notice what's going on. Step one is notice what's going on. Lean into it. Step two is put words to it. Really say it out loud to someone you trust. It doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be someone that you know won't use it against you politically, is someone you know won't, you know, construe it as that you're, you know, not able to work. Just a safe person that you can put words to your experience and say, I used to love this job and now I don't. I used to can't wait to get up in the morning and now this thing feels like, you know, this heavy knapsack on my back, like I'm carried around all day. Because burnout is a reality. It's a reality. It's treatable. Sometimes it's preventable depending on the system. But if you notice it, you put words to it, then you can connect to others around it. You can get out of your head, not feel crazy. So that's really important, noticing and monitoring burnout as a reality in your profession. And then, of course, you know, to bring in the spiritual aspect of it, we would really encourage like a spiritual practice that's just as important to you as making practice, right? Just like you get up and you do your practice schedule, just like you get up and you're thinking of your teammates and your athletes, and just like you get up and you're making sure that your coach knows the schedule, you are going all day from everything from early, you know, weights and lifting to 7 p.m. study hall for your athletes. Somewhere in there, we would suggest that you prioritize at least a half hour of your own spiritual practice. Whether that's reading spiritual materials, doing formal meditation and mindfulness in a God-centric way, picking up a mindfulness practice. You know, there's all these apps now. So Calm and, you know, 10% Happier and Headspace. And well, these apps are making money for a reason. Like, people need this time to switch from doing to being. And that contemplative prayer focus is a tradition that a lot of churches have lost and have not taught us. And so these secular world, the mindfulness and psychology, you know, are basically discovering what Christians have known, which is what Jesus did, right? He was like, leave me alone. I need to go be by myself. You guys are killing me. Like, he was going and praying by himself. And when he was troubled, he talked to God. And when he was upset, he talked to God. He wasn't always ministering. He wasn't always working. He had this contemplative practice where he would stop and connect and figure out what was going on in that space. And I think in the everyday go, it can be really easy to forget that, like Rachel said, you know, you're performing too. You're not necessarily on the field anymore, but you're such an integral part of the team that, like, you're the tool, you're the person. Like, people can't do what they need to do without you. And so you have this wonderful resource as someone who believes in God that you can tap into for strength, for wisdom, and for refreshment, and for also just like messages literally about what you should do and who you should check on and how you should be and what energy you can take into practice, and making sure that that is literally integrated into your schedule, just like eating and sleeping and spending time with your family, so that the creep of like your team doesn't take over everything. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think what's eye-opening to me is thinking about how all of us, even outside of people who are coaches, it's so valuable to pay attention and take care of ourselves, but let alone when you're dealing with the stress, the amount of work, the responsibility, your busy schedule as coaches, how important that is. So I really appreciate you explaining that. And I've heard you say before and use language like that it's a moral imperative for us to practice self-care and attention to burnout, especially as Christian leaders. So would you mind, I know you touched on that a little bit already, but would you mind diving into that a little bit as well?
Oh, absolutely. I think from an organizational leadership perspective, if you have everybody else's lives in your hands, so to speak, their daily lived life, these young adults going through this really, or teenagers or whoever, no matter what it is, it's a really important developmental stage. You're on the scene of it day in and day out, sometimes more than their parents. And then in college, definitely more than their parents, hopefully. And so you are like really in there. So saying it's a moral imperative is saying if you're going to be a teacher, the Bible's really clear. You are held to a higher standard, the highest standard. You're not allowed to just get your education degree and clock in and be a teacher because you took the right test. In the spiritual world and in God's world and in the word, it's really clear. You're going to take that mantle. You better have strong shoulders and you better have a clean heart. So those things are really like daunting. It's like your moral character, but also it's not just, again, we don't want to accidentally become about like what you do and what you say has to be perfect and right. It really is about being human and being willing to take care of yourself as a living example of how you want the people under you to take care of themselves. You're telling them to not drink. You're telling them to hit curfew. You're telling them not to order fried food before games. You're doing all this stuff. And it's really hard when you're under stress. And if you were an athlete yourself, you're probably sick of it, you know, having all these restrictions. But it's really hard to get in your body enough to sort of hijack the stress response, to get in your body enough to ask yourself what you need. Are you hydrated? To intuitively eat from a place of like nourishment and health and yes, enjoyment, but also not self-medicating, to go to sleep instead of look at those stats some more. Those things are important because what we know about education and about groups who are watching their teacher is that the transfer of learning of content is actually pretty low. So like, it's like 25% on a good day.
Yeah.
But what kids will say, and what adolescents and young adults will say, is they will remember how their leader acted. That's it. That's what they'll remember. It's the thing. They remember what you do even more than what you say. And so it's really important that self-care isn't just this like script. You guys need to take care of yourself. You guys need to make sure that you're getting enough sleep. You guys need to be healthy. Don't be out there drinking. It's just like this. Yes, I mean, that's all true. But, you know, everybody knows what everybody's doing in half of these towns that people coach in. So it's like, you know, you hear about what, and you see, and you notice that when your leader is short-tempered, when your leader is tired, when your leader doesn't have bandwidth for unexpected curveballs, when your leader doesn't have the empathy of connecting with his or her team, it's a moral imperative, because if we burn out, then who comes next? If we burn out, then who comes next? My college coach, who shall remain nameless, which is probably part of the problem, was 27 years old when she got a hold of our team, because it was a Title IX team, and it was a D1 team, but it was Title IX, so it was brand new, so they probably didn't have any money to pay anybody. She was a big deal in the softball world as an athlete. She came in, and by the first fall, 5 people were healthy. 5 out of 20. 5 people could still run, because she decided to put us through SEALs level style boot camp. Just because out of her own leadership philosophy. And, you know, even at 18, I was like, yo, the proof is a little bit in the pudding here. Like 5 people can still run under your leadership. That's what kind of leader you are. And so she came in with her pre-existing issues about power and control that she never had to examine. And then, you know, she didn't even get fired. She just left.
Yeah.
And so that was the impact she had on us. And so morally, her shit ran downhill, excuse my language. It just did. And as leaders, that's what happens. Our stuff rolls downhill. So if you are not addressing your own issues of burnout, cynicism, fatigue, anger, you know, depression, then that stuff does affect the culture of your team. And the two are not disconnected. They are one and the same. And that's a Christian perspective. Not everybody believes that.
Yeah. Yeah.
People do think that if you're burned out, you should just keep going, and that it's not your coworkers or your colleagues or your athlete's problem. That's just a personal problem that you should deal with. But we kind of believe differently, and we see that it is in performance and in real life teams, it does affect the culture of the team, because these young people aren't dumb. They pick up on everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
In sports psychology, you know, there's this term called flow, right? And you really use it when you're like on the court and you're fully in the moment where everything flows, right? It's a performance term, but you know, I think of applying flow to all aspects of our life. And so, you know, as a coach, or, you know, for me as a psychologist, I can tell when I'm in flow and I can tell when I'm not. But, you know, we live in a culture that teaches us to pay a lot of attention and value positive emotions and when things are good, and teaches us to try to ignore and suppress and repress the things that are difficult and stressful or hard, or, you know, aspects of universal suffering. And if we take sports culture, it's a little bit even more like that, right? Like, you know, we are taught to go on and perform and participate even when we're tired and sore and risking our bodies. And so, you know, one of the things about coaching is check yourself when you're not in flow, both in your personal and professional life. And, you know, when Rhea's saying step 1, notice it, right? You can pay attention to the difficulties of your life and find a way through it rather than ignoring it, because that's the stuff that affects your team culture that you don't realize it, right? You've got to do the steps of notice it, put the words to it, talk and connect with someone, even if that's God first, your partner later, your assistant coach, and at some point down the road, you know, a friend, and then maybe a counselor. But along the way, there's going to be realistic problem solving boundaries and actual just practical self-care. I just always want people to go away knowing that if you're not in that flow, whether it's you or your athletes, then that's affecting your team, right?
Mhm.
And it's time to pay attention to it. So don't ignore the difficulties.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that, both of you. I think it's really refreshing to hear that we can almost normalize these things, that we all experience these hard emotions, and by recognizing them, naming them, it brings a lot of like freedom there, and that's where we can really address it, and that's where we can lean into life with God. We're able to flourish more. I think when you talk about flow, my mind also goes to like, that to me is part of a flourishing life when we're in a really healthy state. So I appreciate you guys sharing that. And Rhea, you also mentioned already some practical things like some apps, Calm and Headspace, and some other mindfulness practices, but are there other practical things that each of us, a lot of these coaches, all of us can lean into and actually do?
Sure. I mean, you know, when you're at the top of a pyramid and you're the decision maker, so say you are the head coach or you're part of the coaching staff, I think number one, it's important to have someone in your life that can check you. So some spiritual mentor, if you're in 12-step, a sponsor, if you have a counselor or a coach, but also just like a friend or somebody who has that unique, wonderful dynamic with you where they can like check you and be like, yo, you know, I know you're the head of your little universe in your coaching world, but like, when's the last time you like stopped and prayed about this? Like, you know, someone who will challenge you in that way, because in the little universe of your team, if you're on the decision-making panel, of course, your heart may be that you want to always follow God, but the reality may be that you're often the one making all the decisions. And so you can float away from a spiritual practice and sort of that little way of being humble and listening and being quiet and not always directing. And so I would encourage you to intentionally carve out space where you are not the top of the pyramid and you are not in a power dynamic on top. So if that means you really like Richard Rohr and you really like his spiritual teachings and you're going to get his emails on your phone every day and you're going to commit to reading them while you're on the road, obviously Richard Rohr can't come through your phone from New Mexico and tell you what to do, but like you're submitting yourself under the role of like a teacher. You're reading, you're not spiritually loafing, you're not mentally loafing, you're like trying to like stay on top of it. You get that email in your phone, you're like, oh yeah, this is important too. So whether it's a daily email, a weekly Bible study check-in, a book club, something where you feel like someone is holding you accountable to attend to this dimension of your life. Because what happens is when you get on the road, I mean, in my experience, you're on the road. So that's half the year. You're not going to church. You're not doing your planned series. You're traveling. You're doing all this stuff. And it's not necessary to go to church to have a thriving spiritual life, but there is something about having this like weekly routine where you can like go, turn off the other parts of your life and really commit to silence and focusing on the spiritual aspect. So practically, along with the good old things that we know, which are sleep, rest, attending to your body, making sure that your vulnerability factors there are being taken care of, because those are huge.
Yeah.
I would also say making that regular spiritual check-in, importantly, with someone who will check you and making sure that that person's in your life. You know, we've kind of lost this idea of having a teacher. Like everyone who's practicing spirituality in 12-step has a sponsor, and the people who don't have a sponsor, you can tell they work their program completely differently. Like they're their own sponsor. And it's considered a problem when you're trying to like get sober off something. But if you don't identify in that world, nobody in a church is gonna really like kind of peg you on Sunday morning as needing like a teacher that you can talk to about things that are going on inside of you. Some people go to confession, they have really good relationships with their spiritual leader, but that's fallen by the wayside. Honestly, a lot of times as therapists, we end up becoming like unofficial moral ethicists. Like people used to go to confession and now they come to us. And, you know, it is one of those things where it's like, there are going to be times when you've been in charge all day and you've been making decisions all day, and you need to be able to check in and talk to somebody that like you're not the boss of.
Yeah.
And that very well may be your partner, that very well may be someone on your staff that even though you may have a job title above them, you guys have an understanding where they can check you and they can tell you like, look, man, you're acting like you're too tired, you're snapping, you need to take it easy. And if you're extra lucky, that person believes in God and can be like, well, let's pray about it. You know, that doesn't always happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so helpful. I'm sure for the coaches listening right now, as you name different things, something might spark this coach's attention. I know certain things have sparked my attention as, ooh, I want to commit and lean into that. So naming the practicals is so, so helpful, I think, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what are healthy next steps. We don't know what are simple ways to lean into these things. So really appreciate you explaining that and diving in a little bit to first explain like why we really care about this and why it's so important, and then to walk us through what that can actually look like. So thank you, Rhea. Yeah, would love to ask you, Rachel, a few questions, and Rhea, feel free to chime in as well if you also have some insight and things to add here. But would love to first hear from you, Rachel, if there's anything, what would you want coaches to know about mental health? If there's anything that you'd want them to know, what would it be?
Well, I'm a little bit of a nerd on this. So both my clients and my friends and my family, and so therefore all you coaches, I want everybody to know the details of our neurobiology. Really, I mean, the stress response. When I first learned about performance, one of the things I learned about was this thing called the inverted U. And basically it's just saying that there's an optimal zone of performance, right? And part of that is related to your nervous system. So we have this thing called a stress response. Some people call it the fight or flight response. It's important that we also know it's actually the truly the flight response, run from danger. More often than not, it becomes the freeze response, where people freeze in the face of danger or something bad happening. And as a kind of last resort, or for people who are trained to, it's the fight response, right? To fight off something that's dangerous and to protect you. But this is the same part of the nervous system that we all use to perform in sports and athletics and kind of everything else, right? So even an interview and a job interview, and when you're first on the job, your stress is really high, and for coaches, big games and all kinds of things. And so regulation of the nervous system is a really important goal, both for athletes and anybody in their professional career. It also relates to our overall health. So there's two parts of the nervous system that interact, right? I'll just easily call it the relaxation response and then the stress response. You need to be activated and breathing and taking lots of oxygen in to perform well, but you don't want to be too, what they call, aroused or too anxious. And so as a coach, you're always, trying to be at that optimal level of nervous system regulation where you are calm enough but aroused enough to get your players going and to perform and engage. But you're also trying to train your athletes to be in the appropriate part of their nervous system. And everybody's different. So if you have people who have anxiety, who get a little too hyped up before a game, they have to learn strategies to bring themselves down and activate their relaxation part of their nervous system a little bit. And if you have people who kind of go into the freeze response and start to shut down, right? You need to get them engaged and out of the freeze response a little bit, and regulating the anxiety in a way that their body can work to be very balanced. So, I encourage people, read about the stress response, educate yourself about it. It has everything to do with our health and well-being and our performance. Nowadays we know a lot about inflammation too. And, when we talk about self-care, we're trying to do self-care in a way that regulates our nervous system, right? So your spiritual practices, the little things that you can do, like relaxation exercises, mindfulness exercises, gardening. I took my dog for a walk this morning. My walks with my dog, like the petting with my dog, right? All of these little things regulate our nervous system, and it's really, really important to have your performance and your nervous system go together and to learn about it. And I think if you can learn about it as a coach, you can also teach it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can get to know your athletes on an individual level in terms of, what can I help them do? What can I help them learn? What resources can I give them? How can we as a team, right, engage in strategies that help people regulate their stress response?
Yeah.
They're going to be better performers in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the way that you're explaining it, saying that coaches deal with this when they have big games, not only athletes, but each one of us has opportunities where we need to regulate our nervous system and what's going on, and learning more about it and leaning in there, I think is so helpful, and really helpful for you to give a brief intro and some of the like science behind it, and how these practical tools link actually to how our body is operating. So that's really helpful. Thanks for diving into that. Would love to hear a little bit more about what else you can share with us about the mind and body link and how it affects our performance. Do you have extra things?
Oh gosh, I have so much. I could go
I
on
love
and on
it.
about this. One of the interesting things that I always like people to understand is, our thoughts obviously have a big impact, right? So a lot of sports psychologists are heavily educated on how the mind and our thoughts, right, affect our performance. It's essentially all through our body, right? So it's the mind-body link. Well, when you understand the stress response, the fight, flight, or freeze response, what you don't realize is that a thought, right, about, like, an athlete thinks about something potentially bad happening, right? Or they're fearful. The mind treats a thought like it's actually a bear in front of you. Like, a thought is that powerful that one thought can activate a stress response. And so, when you are teaching your team, even like pre-game rituals, right? You want to learn strategies about, how do I teach the mind aspect? We cannot control our thoughts, right? We can't make ourselves not think something. And so what everybody is dealing with in the mind-body link is, how do I train my mind? It's just, rather than, running and warming up and doing certain stretches, we're looking at the mind as something to also train. And how
do I watch my mind?
Right. How do I notice what it's doing? And I don't 100% make it my reality, but I know what to do with it when a certain thing happens. So, it's like, what do they call it when the baseball players get the hips or something? Oh gosh.
Oh yeah. Yips. Is that what it
is? The yips. I forget the word every time. I don't know why I try to say hips instead of yips. Right?
It's a weird word.
But it's like, I should remember these things as in this kind of work. But so, there's a lot of mental training that goes into good performance, right? The mind-body link is essentially the things that you need to know what to do with your thoughts. Now, I teach people, right, because we treat a lot of trauma and a lot of anxiety. And once your nervous system activates a high stress response, you biochemically cannot take that away for about 40 minutes, right?
Mhm.
You know, the good thing in athletics is you're okay if you have a little adrenaline and cortisol. Like everything is all right. You need to be pumped up a little bit.
Yeah.
You're just trying not to go too high on your anxiety response. So you have two main strategies to affect the nervous system and therefore the body. You have the muscles, because the muscles give feedback directly to the brain, right? So once a stress response gets activated, muscles get tense. But if people do bodily relaxation exercises of the muscles, they're not going to not feel anxious. Their heart is still going to be beating faster, but the muscles are trying to send the brain a message that says, I'm safe. And then the other thing that we have a little bit more control over is, rather than taking lots of oxygen in, like before you're playing a game, right? You're gonna take lots of oxygen in when you're actually playing and warming up. But if you're trying to regulate your nervous system beforehand, what you're actually wanting to do is take less oxygen in, because that slows the nervous system and the stress response down. So people will teach deep breathing exercises, but when we treat anxiety, right, we don't teach deep breathing exercises. We teach slow breathing exercises, because when you take less oxygen in by taking slow breaths, you slow the nervous system down, you slow the stress response down, and that's something you have control over. You can do the mental training aspects with your mind and your thoughts, but the actual bodily things that you do are slow breaths and muscle relaxation exercises, right? And then you get to the self-talk strategies and practicing certain ways of thinking. The hard part as a coach is you need to kind of know what exactly is going on in someone's mind, right? So you're trying to get a sense of what are the things that their mind tells them, right? And then you're trying to teach healthy strategies, right? Not, and I'll make a clarification, not invalidating strategies, okay? Healthy strategies. So, you know, invalidation is me saying, you know, let's get up and go. It's going to be okay. But when somebody's mind is telling them it's not going to be okay, saying it's going to be okay to them doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just invalidates the reality of what their mind is saying. So, you know, learning different strategies and saying things like, hey, I know your mind's telling you a lot of stuff right now. Like, instead saying, right, you've trained, you've practiced, you've done everything you can. Let's do this. Let's make it the best performance we can, right? Yeah. Just, you know, keep your head up and go forward and keep trying, right? Is a better response than like, it's going to be okay. So there's just little tricks about how we say things as leaders that's different when we think about how we're going to lead and give mental training exercise to athletes.
Yeah, Rhea, did you have something to add as well?
Oh, I think that's great. I think also, you know, this is one of the things where you can start to problem solve. If you've got a player who's really talented, you know they're talented, they kill it in practice, and then they sort of underperform, or they're a little bit average in games, you know, this can be misconstrued as lack of effort, lack of caring, you know, and young people can cover it as lack of caring and lack of effort because they're embarrassed or feeling shame. And so you can start to problem solve about like, where's this underperformance coming from? You can fire up one player by kind of getting closer to their face and being like, let's go, and that's what they need. And another player is like, ugh, like get out of my face and just leave me alone, because they need some distance because they're too aroused, their sympathetic nervous system's too high, and that feels like more. You can just start to sort of differentiate between the members on your team and problem solve that. Underperformance might be related to over arousal, which is very tricky. It's hard to tell. Yeah. I also want to say, you know, to your original question, what do coaches need to know about mental health? If you are lucky enough to have a sports psychologist, you just need to know that sports psychologists often focus on imagery, rehearsal, really important things like pregame ritual, self-talk. All those things are wonderful as long as you have a good base. You have a good base with yourself, and you have a good base with your parents, and you have a good base with your self-esteem and your performance and your trauma response. The minute that you have a player that you've recruited that comes into your system that does not have that good base, which is going to be a percentage of your team no matter what, if they're not doing well at school, if they're having a hard time in their dorm, if they're lonely, if they haven't meshed well with their team, if there's trauma that's coming up because they're now young adults or they're at the age where their repressed trauma is now coming up, that sports psychologist is not going to know what to do with them. And those positive affirmations, you can do it, imagine yourself performing, all that stuff that sports psychology assumes will work for everyone is actually super invalidating. Because if someone's having flashbacks and PTSD symptoms and an eating disorder flare up and panic attacks, a sports psychologist has no idea what to do with any of that. So coaches need to know that they don't have a clinical psychologist around, and they need to go get one or at least talk to one. So you don't have to know everything about mental health, but I would encourage that you have a liaison or a consultant or somebody from the University Counseling Center who hopefully knows a little bit about athletes and but really could fill in the gap on the clinical psychology side, just in case that one athlete comes along that has an eating disorder, or the one athlete comes along with trauma, that one athlete comes along with an unexpected pregnancy or an unexpected death in the family, and then you're not feeling like, oh shoot, now I have to be the therapist too. You don't. You can consult with a mental health professional and say, what's the best way to talk about this? What's the best way to go about this? Hopefully it won't be money coming out of your own pocket. Hopefully you can go through the university for that. But just to kind of know that a sports psychologist doesn't know about any clinical issues and that those are completely different fields.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and there's one more thing, that I want people to understand about the mind, right? Your belief system coming in has a huge effect on your performance. And, as coaches, especially college coaches, you have your athletes at a really important time. Everybody's brain is not completely developed, but their belief systems are pretty solid. Although, you can have a great impact on the further development of a healthy belief system. When we treat anxiety and trauma, and we look at the things that really affect people, especially with anxiety, we pay attention to a lot of specific beliefs. There's these themes that we pay attention to. So there's safety, trust, power and control, esteem, and intimacy. Because when hardship happens to us, whether it's something small like somebody goes through a breakup, or something big where somebody experienced childhood abuse, or, God forbid, abuse at the hands of a coach at some point in their development, which we know happens, right? These are the belief systems that are affected. So when athletes are interacting with you, they're trying to develop a set of beliefs in their mind. Like, am I going to be physically safe in my sport with you, right? Are you emotionally safe? Am I safe in the world right now? I mean, this is very applicable right now. Everybody is navigating these belief systems about our own safety, with the coronavirus, and athletes coming back to college and having to play or not play. And are they gonna, go to school, and they're thinking about their safety, right? So everybody going forward is going to be affected in terms of how they think about safety. And then trust is a huge one in the coaching and the athletics world. Can I trust my teammates? Can I trust you as a coach? What are the aspects of when I trust you and when I don't trust you, right? So cultivating an environment where there's a lot of trust in a lot of aspects of life is really important. And then what are the power and control dynamics, right? And so people who have trauma and sometimes anxiety can already have disrupted belief systems about these things. So they'll, they don't know it. You're not 18 and 19 and 20 and 21 and 22 thinking about your belief systems. But as a coach and as a leader, you're watching things play out that underneath whatever it is that's actually going on, they are likely that belief systems have been disrupted, right? So when you're like, why does this athlete kind of have this adversarial relationship with me? Like, why do they clap back when I give them instruction?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know, but somebody in their life caused them to have some kind of distorted beliefs and experiences, probably related to safety, trust, and power and control, right? And then when we get more into self-esteem and self-worth, how does a person think of themselves, and how do they think of themselves as a performer, right? So, all of those skewed ways of thinking in terms of negative self-talk and negative beliefs, some people, they can just do little tweaks, and with some good coaching, they'll be able to do self-talk and get themselves through their anxiety. Other people, you want to kind of notice, are there these themes that seem to be coming up that they might need more help with, right? In clinical psychology, we have this very specific practice of something called cognitive behavioral therapy. Sports psychologists are a little bit more familiar with it nowadays because it's the evidence-based treatments that work on anxiety. And so they've kind of educated themselves enough to know about how cognition, aka right, our mind and our thoughts and our beliefs, affect our anxiety and our performance. But that, they know a little. You really need someone who specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy and understands these bigger contexts to be able to consult with and help your athletes. So even if somebody doesn't have a huge breadth of experience with athletics or sports psychology, if they know some of the basics of cognitive behavioral therapy, then they can be somewhat more helpful. So, I really encourage coaches to start thinking in these terms of these beliefs and pay attention to what they notice about their athletes, and also to pay attention to what their beliefs are themselves. Because if you have disrupted beliefs about safety, trust, power and control, esteem, and intimacy, right? Meaning connectedness in relationships, right? Then those are the beliefs that you're transmitting. So if there's any question in you as you're listening to this of like, oh, I have issues with that, then you kind of want to try to sort through it and think about like, what is it, right? Like, how did I get a distorted belief, or is it distorted? And like, what can I do about it? What is it that I'm trying to communicate in a healthy manner?
Yeah. And we see how all of this, our minds, our bodies, our performance is all connected, which to me points to like this ultimate beautiful creator of like, when we learn about this, my mind keeps going back to, wow, God, you've given us these really cool tools to help regulate our bodies, to like calm our minds, and to then, which in turn impacts our performance, which is amazing. But yeah, as coaches, what can coaches do to positively impact performance, whether it be for themselves or their team?
Well, obviously, we talked about the moral imperative of self-care, right? I really think that the ability to communicate safety and trust, safety and trust is like the foundation of your team, right? So, your athletes need to know their body is safe. They need to know, right, that they have housing, and that, the practical aspects of being an athlete and having scholarships, right? Like, isn't necessarily in question. I mean, you can only do so much to control that, but what you do have control over, you're trying to give a sense of security, right? Because I attend to the mind and the emotions of things, I want people to give emotional safety. I talk a lot about validation and what that means. Again, My experiences, I grew up in the coaching world with a lot of probably invalidation. It's like this, like my mom says, why don't people just pull their bootstraps on and go to work? And I'm like, it's not that easy, mom. Like, you know, and it's like, when my swimming coach yelled at me, right? Like, stop talking, Rachel, just swim, and there are times that you have to do that as a coach.
Mhm.
But in the times where you don't have to do that, if you can learn what validation really looks like, right? Validation is being able to express to somebody that they are having a reasonable, understandable, valid, right, experience of that they're in their reality. Their reality is real for a reason. So even if somebody's having a lot of negative self-talk, right, being able to say, like, that's what our mind does sometimes. Sometimes our minds say a lot of negative things. That's validating to somebody's reality.
Right. You don't have to agree with it.
Right. And you don't have to say it's rational. You're just trying to reflect back to someone that their experience is real and valid, and that you're not dismissing it, questioning it, or challenging it. You're just reflecting it back to them, because the thing to know is then it goes away easier. It actually resolves itself better when you, as another human being, are connected in an emotionally safe, trusting manner. Somebody then is able to code that you don't dismiss them, question them, invalidate them, challenge them, or try to make them be a different person with different thoughts, right?
Right.
They just know that you get it. And from here on out, they're going to have a higher level of trust with you. So, I always say, like, Google validation strategies, Google active listening, right? Learn the things that, like, we learn in our beginning stages of counseling, so that you can do those tiny aspects that make a difference to cultivate an emotionally safe environment. Allow people to tell you whatever they need to tell you. Try not to be someone who communicates with your tone or your words, shame or judgment, right?
Or defensiveness.
Right.
Like, I took you out of the rotation because you're not performing, and that's the truth, and you're just going to have to deal with it. It's very different. You can have a meeting with somebody where they're upset because they're taken out of the rotation. You can validate it. You can say, I know this is really hard. I know you came here to play. I know you've been working hard. This is my decision. It's not forever. It will be my decision for this weekend. I want you to keep doing A, B, and C. There's a way that we can get you back in, but this is what I've decided to do. And I'm really sorry that this is so hard for you. I know you really care about getting your shot, and I know you're here to play hard. When they walk out of your office, you don't have to put them back in the rotation. It's not like validation is letting someone talk you out of your reality.
Right.
It's just saying that their feelings are understandable and normal. It literally takes 3 seconds for you to do that. For that person to feel seen and heard, but it doesn't mean you have to change your game plan. It just means that you connect with them on a human level, and you use the opportunity to be more validating than maybe adults have in power and authority over them have been in the past.
Yeah. I know for me, when I think back on times when I've been validated in really difficult situations, how much of a difference it's made. And maybe we haven't always had language for that, but I'm sure so many of us can look back, and now if we're able to identify that person really, really understood and use language where they were with me in that, they empathized with me, even if they didn't fully agree with what my thoughts were, they saw where that was coming from. And then, you, like you're saying, you feel so connected to the person. It helps you, if you're experiencing negative thoughts, at least for myself, move past that. So even looking back on my life experience, I love that you're breaking this down, because it's made such a big difference for me. The moments that I've been able to validate other people or have been validated by others. So thanks for diving into that. Yeah.
The only other thing I'll say
is
just the research shows that commitment is really high, when people still have a high level of enjoyment, and that their sport hasn't become business, right? And so, make it fun. Have fun. Like, when your commitment is high, you're more invested and your performance is better. So, if the main thing that keeps commitment high is enjoyment, try to cultivate that.
That's a really good point.
I love that. Yeah. Well, this is like all gold. I'm so thankful that we are diving in. And so I have one more question for you from myself, and then we'll get to go through some questions from the coaches. But anything else that you've come across with your research or clinical work that you would want coaches to know, that this group to know especially?
Just, use your power for good. The moral imperative that we have as Christians is to be Christ-like. And, leadership and power issues, when we take it from a Christ-like perspective, we flip power upside down, and we give power to other people. And so, your athletes can be the ones with the power, right? And the power and influence that you do have, really be attuned to it, because you are in a hierarchical position, and you have a strong ability to influence people. So be very attentive to it. Try to cultivate goodness, and look for Christ as that example. We listen more and we say less. We look for, what are the carrots? How do our clients or our athletes, how do they move forward? Each one is different. I need to know what the carrot is for each person. I need to care about who they are and what they want for their life, beyond just this game. Because when we have those carrots and we know those people on an individual level, the influence that we can have is more powerful. But we also leave a wonderful impact on their life. And if Christ wants us to do anything in our professions, it's to connect with human beings like he connects with us, and to leave an influence in a Christ-like manner on their life. So that's what I ultimately hope that you get to do as coaches.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. Just, you're almost like these undercover agents who have been put in this responsible situation. I would just say tend to your flock. Like, don't be the dad who doesn't know what's going on. Don't be the mom who's clueless. Don't be clueless. Know that people get in domestic violence relationships in college. Know that people get drunk and things happen. Know that sexual assault on campuses is a plague. Yeah. Know that your athletes are students. Know that there's gender dynamics and race dynamics going on in this country, and that Black people don't feel safe around police. Know this stuff. Don't act like sports are not completely overlaid over every social justice issue that Jesus cared about. And when you know that, you can be the type of leader that's like Jesus, who's like, what are you doing here? What are you doing? He saw people, and he was there in this very non-judgmental but not fluffy sometimes way. So you don't have to be a counselor. You don't have to put on a therapist voice. You don't have to act like anything that you're not. But if you are, me and my siblings were joking the other day how much it sucked to have two parents that could hear the Holy Spirit. Because we were just like, man, that sucked. Mom would literally get woke up in the middle of the night and be like, where's my son? And we were laughing about it. One time I was about to walk out the front door. My dad called me from Florida and was like, what are you doing? This is back before cell phones. I was about to walk out the front door and go to the corner house where a boy lived. I was 13 years old. He called from Florida and was like, I know you're going down the street to that boy's house. I was like, damn it, like, why do I have to have parents that actually like listen to God, you know? So it's really, really good. Those moments, I remember those moments fondly and with humor now, because I'm like 40 and I'm not 13. But also with like that feeling of like, that is what good parents do. That's what good leaders do. Obviously you have limits. You're not these athletes' parents, but being sensitive enough to listen to the Holy Spirit, tending to your flock with wisdom, asking, none of us know how to do this. You wake up every day. You could say every day, I have no idea how to lead this group of people. I have no idea what to do in practice today. I have no idea how to make it fun. It feels like a job today. I have no idea what to do with this sheep that is kind of going off. I don't know how to get her or him back. And just in that surrender, that's what makes you a good leader. So in that weakness and that not knowing and that humility, we get to be strong leaders. It doesn't have to be, we look the part, we put on the sunglasses, we have the right haircut, we look like a strong coach. We're on a different team. We're on the Christian team. And on the Christian team, we can be weak and humble and bumbling and every day wake up saying, I have no idea how to do this, and he can make us successes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately we can be honest with ourselves and with God. And I think even when we act like we have it all together, that's not necessarily the honest truth, and our last teaching actually was just on with God and how do we invite God in and do we notice God in practice. And I think so much of this connects really well because God has things to say and can join us, and we don't have to cling to power so tightly.
Right. Or ego.
Yeah, which is like the most beautiful and refreshing thing to me. So yeah, thank you guys. Would love to pepper you with some questions from the coaches. They have questions for you. And so we asked them the question, as a coach, what would you want to ask a Christian psychologist? And so I'm so excited to hear your thoughts. There's 9 questions and they kind of are under different categories. So would love to dive in. I think the first couple questions are related to trust. So these are from in our coach's words. So questions related to trust. What are steps to build trust in coaches to players and vice versa? And then what are the best ways to instill trust and develop a relationship with your players when time is limited?
Rachel, you want to take that one?
One thing, I suggest is if you're willing to and when you can, given whatever your life constraints are, have kind of an open door policy and communicate that and then follow through. So it's like when we have trainees and interns, right? It's basically being able to say, first of all, I'm available to you. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do to make myself available to you. Please seek me out. Now, some people will and some people won't. The most important thing, on your team is everybody's going to communicate about you. So everybody is going to know if you follow through on your word. And so the follow through with your availability, right? You're allowed to have boundaries and say, well, I can't meet you then, but I come back now, right? Or I can't talk to you now, but like find a way to be available and then really follow those strategies. Like I was saying earlier, learn about validation and learn about active listening, because one of the ways that you cultivate trust and then it gets communicated through your whole team is by what you say and what you do. I think my other just general recommendation, especially nowadays, and again, it depends on how old you are, where you are in the region of your country, but be very cautious about sharing your personal and political, beliefs about things. It's not that you can't share them. It's that because
people have been heard.
Yeah, and because you're in a power dynamic, there's not an equal playing field for discussion. And so you don't want athletes to experience you as somebody who just kind of preaches their beliefs. And I'm not even talking necessarily religious beliefs, right? We're just talking about beliefs about what happens on campus, and beliefs about sports, and beliefs about, Black Lives Matter and things. And so, if you can tell that your athletes are in line with your beliefs and you're having some gentle discussion, okay, but be cautious, because people will not say anything if they find out that your beliefs are different from theirs. They will just code it as, you think and believe differently, and now I know I can't trust you on that matter. So when you're, beginning a season and meeting new players, and, have, new recruits coming in, be cautious, always be cautious. Follow through on what you say you're going to do. Keep a to-do list. And if you say you're going to do something, write it down so that you can remember, so that you can do it later. And really think about that concept of emotional safety. I think the other part that Rhea said earlier was, watch your defensiveness and learn how to give specific feedback, right? In a non-judgmental stance, where you're using descriptive words rather than evaluative judgmental words, right? So even learning how to provide feedback, right, on the field that's corrective and instructional, but not necessarily criticizing, right?
Right. And I would also,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I would also say, if you have limited time, one of the things that always works is just honesty and authenticity. So my big slogan is assessment before intervention. So if I don't know you very well and I'm walking up to you, say I'm at an FCA camp or something, I don't know these 14 girls from Adam. Right now they're under my charge, and like I'm walking up and I'm like, what have you been told about how to, when you catch and you shift and you're throwing down to second base, like what have you been taught? Has it worked for you? What do you think about this approach? Because, people will have funky swings and they will have funky stuff going on, and the coach in you wants to like get in there, but you can just be like, whoa, this girl doesn't know me. Like, how does this work, right? Assessment before intervention. Does this work for you? Is this something you want to work on? Of course, if you're their coach year round, you know whether or not it's working for them. But are you willing to do this with your body? Are you willing to try this? Assessment before intervention. I would also say, keep an eye on physical consent. Can I go ahead and show you? Can I go ahead and show you where to put your hand? Can I, body autonomy is really important. You're asking them if you can touch them. You're asking them if you can move their hand. It's a little thing that takes 2 seconds. And in the coaching world, it's very important. In the light of all the abusive stuff that goes on with the American Gymnastics Academy and all that stuff, consent and continuous consent over what people do with their body is really important. So assessment before intervention, an eye on consent is important, yes, with boys and men too. And also, I would say, call it out. If you don't know someone very well, you get to say, this really works with little kids, but it always works with kids. It's just like, I know you don't know me very well. I know you don't know me very well. I know you don't know me yet. I know you don't trust me yet. I know this is hard because you've had this approach all through high school. I know I'm trying to mess with you right now with this thing that's really hard to let go of. What if you were to give it a try? And then if it doesn't work, you can go back. But so you just call out the, like, we aren't cool like that yet. And I know it. And I'm not just going to pull rank on you and tell you to do it. I'm going to ask your consent. What do you think? Because these are athletes. They're intelligent. They're physically intelligent. They've been on club teams. They've had world-class coaches. It's their body. So it's sort of like, and sometimes we get nervous because we know we don't have a strong rapport with a player, and we may get more hierarchical or less hierarchical, and then not give them the attention they need while we wait for the rapport to build. But really, you just got to dive right in and be like, hey, can I ask you some questions? Can I do some assessment? I'm thinking about doing this intervention. What do you think? And that dialogue and respect with that person as a human being, or without totally pulling rank and saying, like, I've seen this work in the past, it could work for you, eventually kind of helps them feel like they have a seat at the table around like what's being discussed around their performance and their body.
Yeah. And you guys just talked about power dynamics and how like releasing power is like so important. And I'm hearing like such similar language here, and how that impacts trust between players on teams. So there's like definitely consistency there. So thanks for sharing those thoughts. Would love to dive in. There's a few questions about confidence and self-talk. So I'll list them all and then we can revisit and I can repeat any if needed. But how do you determine if an athlete is confident? One coach asks, they're asking about addressing negative self-talk and how to help teach the girls to be confident in pressure situations.
I would start by saying, I think sometimes you can tell confidence in the reverse way because there's a lack of confidence. I think in some ways that can stand out more, because you'll see it. You'll see body language, actual verbal expressions that are and emotional frustration that are communicating things when people are making mistakes, right? Or kind of not playing well. So it's like, I have a kindergartner. So, when he goes, oh, right. and when, or like, I heard one of his classmates in the room at one point say like, I'm so stupid, right? Like, you're like, whoa, okay. There it is. There's the lack of confidence. So, I think true confidence is, hard to measure, and you're not attending to it as much because people are in the flow when they have confidence. So, paying attention to the little things, again, getting to know your individual player and that expressiveness, the verbal statements, the body language, everything when there's a lack of confidence. Dealing with negative self-talk is quite a challenging thing. As a coach, you want to pay attention to your encouragement and the kinds of things that you're saying when you're giving encouragement or when you're giving instruction, right? Negative self-talk, even by therapists, is a hard thing to address if somebody has a lot of negative self-talk because you're trying to teach a very specific skill. So that's sometimes a thing to refer out for. Ask somebody to go do 3 sessions with a school counselor about how to learn the skill of dealing with their negative self-talk. But really, it involves a couple of simple steps, which is mindfully notice your thoughts, right? Try to treat them as if they're just thoughts, and then have realistic, valid, reality-based statements that you're able to say to yourself. Now, remember, you're doing this while you're trying to regulate your nervous system because negative self-talks affects your body. So you're like, teaching someone, okay, relax your muscles, slow your breathing down, and then repeat not just an affirmation, right, but a realistic based self-talk, which is, right, some of those things like, I've practiced, I know how to do this, right, I can trust my body. And it has to be tailored to that person's negative self-talk, which is sometimes why you want to refer out so that they can talk with somebody in a confidential manner about what it is that's going on in their negative self-talk. So I think those are kind of like my best suggestions. But then when you're giving your encouragement, right, you're thinking about correcting that self-talk, and not in an invalidating way, in an actual realistic way. Like, I've seen you practice, I've seen you do this, I know you've got this skill, like, I believe in you, right? You've got this. Sometimes those kinds of words where it's reality-based is really important.
Yeah. And I think there's 2 big camps on confidence, and this is just literally from my mind, so don't take it as science. But as when I was coaching and when I was playing, there's 2 camps. There's the big emotion camp and the not so big emotion camp. And the big emotion camp group of players and athletes, confidence completely depended on how they felt that day. So like whatever mood they were in, they were like, I'm about to go at this game. I'm going to be great. Or they were just like, I hate everything. My cleats suck. Like everything feels weird. It feels bad. Those kids need a lot of validation. They need a lot of they need some soothing. Mm-hmm. This is hard. I'm sorry. And I caught in college, so my pitchers went into those 2 camps too. So it was like the big emotion camp, confidence wavered depending on mood. And then there's the not so big emotion camp, and they're just like machines. and you don't mess with the machine. They're confident as long as you leave them alone. Don't pick on them. And even though they could get rattled sometimes and they just needed a little pep talk, like, I know your changeup sucks today. I won't call a changeup if you don't want me to call it. Just shake it off. You're a badass. You're fine. We're fine without a changeup. And they're already like, all right. They have to feel a little bit in control, like, because the standards are so high for them to feel confident. So you try to like understand and let them keep their not big emotion presentation. They have their game face. Yeah. And both are needed for a team. These people are like the emotional thermostat that go up and down, and these people are like the unwavering people that just on a biochemical level, for whatever reason, are not wired so sensitively, so they don't let their mood trump their game face and their regulation strategies that they have, which are usually control. So it really is depending on which camp the person is in. You can be kind of stymied by this camp. You're like, you were really confident in practice this week. What the hell happened on the van right here? And you ask them, what happened? You don't seem confident. You okay? What's going on? And when they tell you whatever it is, you go, oh, that sucks. All right. You know, you can take a couple deep breaths because you're getting them to regulate their big emotions. Do you think that you can kind of take a minute for yourself? What do you need? What do you need? They just need just 5 minutes of attention. And then this camp over here takes a lot for them to lose their confidence. But once you're trying to prevent that from happening. So you're doing game talk, and you're not necessarily talking emotional content. You're more talking about from a rational perspective. What's going on? How are you doing? Okay, you're good. You're good. You're good. You know, you got this kind of thing, because they've got their well-oiled presentation. So depending on which camp your players fall in, you know, knowing whether or not someone's confident is really can depend on the day.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think when we think about people we're leading or people on our teams, I'm sure right now there's people that come to mind that kind of fall in those categories a little bit. And Rachel, I also wanted to say, when you're talking about self-talk, my coach did some training for my team while I played in college on self-talk, and it was my senior year, and we were in postseason, and we were down in the fifth set. It was like 10-14. So you played a 15. So, right. And I was back at the line to serve. So my career is on the line, and my coach in our practices before had done self-talk work, and I could feel these negative thoughts coming up. And so we had talked about deep breathing, and we had talked about what can I can only think one thing at once. So what am I choosing to repeat in my mind and to think? Right. And so it was these moment of sitting back there and trying to calm myself and saying, I've practiced for this. Like, this is why I play for these moments to go for it. And I've trained enough where I can do this, and all these moments. And it really made a huge difference on my performance. We talk about how our minds impact our performance. I was able to get my serves in. So it's really cool that you broke that down, because my mind went back to that scenario where it made such a big difference for me.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great example, right? Like, what do you do to teach people to perform well and do their best in high pressure situations? Well, you do a lot of mental training beforehand. You do self-talk exercises. You try to do imagery exercises. You know, a lot of coaches, who are taking advice from sports psychologists have their athletes do yoga workouts specifically because it regulates the nervous system and it teaches them to move with their breath. And then a lot of people will do imagery exercises after the end of a yoga workout, right? Like, it's simply that you're training your...
Uh-oh.
Oh no.
She froze.
She froze for me too.
She totally froze. Okay. Sounded like it was going to be good too.
Yeah, let's see if maybe she'll come back and we can revisit the question. Okay.
Well, and I want to say too that you can resource your own team. If you've got really confident people, you can ask what they tell themselves. It's really interesting to me. Yeah. I would just have like casual chats with my team, and I would like ask the more confident kind of baller girls, like, what do you say? What do you think when you step in the box? They'd be like, hit it hard no matter what. And I'm like, oh, that's a good one. And the other girls are like hearing it, because some of those girls, in my experience on my team, not talking for y'all's teams, like, we're just thinking, don't mess up. Right? That's a totally different way. I hope I get a hit today is different from, one of my teammates who was like, I wonder if I'm going to go 3 for 4 or 4 for 4 today. I'm like, yes, you know, like there's just some people you're like, yes, you're like the positive self-talk Yoda on this team, you know, and, you know, share that because these girls can steal from you and just use it.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to involve a therapist, right? You can just resource from the girls who already have you on lock like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And my coach had talked about there's such a big difference between when we're back at the line to serve and we're thinking, just don't miss, just don't miss, versus I love this sport. I've trained for this. I can do this. Like this is what I'm going after. It's such a big difference and it really does impact our performance.
Absolutely.
So I love that you guys broke that down. Well, maybe we can continue on and see if Rachel will join us again.
Definitely. She'll figure it out.
Yeah, there's some more questions that I don't want to skip out on. So these ones relate a little bit more to accountability. So the questions are from our coaches. How do you help a player with high talent and average effort become aware of her lack of effort without you losing rapport, and helping our athletes set and hold team standards, accountability?
Yeah, excellent question. This is really hard because it ruins team chemistry too. When someone feels like they were a BFD from their little hometown and now they're running with the winners, and sometimes your ego can't take it. Sometimes you've never had a coach call you on it before because the coach is too scared to lose you. Sometimes there's stuff going on and you literally don't feel like you can. And so again, with the assessment before intervention, you know, make sure you're not publicly, you want to take them offline. So you're not doing this in front of the whole team, obviously. I think that's pretty obvious, but just in case, you take them offline. You know, if there's any way you can make it a casual conversation so that it doesn't feel like they're being dragged into the principal's office, I would try that. Keep in mind that you hold their scholarship in your hands. So you're an employer.
Yeah.
You're an employer. You have employees, thousands and thousands of dollars. This is what you have in your hands. So when you bring in an employee and you give them critical feedback, if you don't know how to be an employer, if you don't have any management under your belt, if you've just been an athlete and you think that qualifies you to have these crucial conversations, it don't. It don't. You need to get a book on having crucial conversations. You need to Google, how do I manage employees and have crucial conversations? Google's our friend. You need to like do some sort of like mentorship program with another head coach who has 20 years under his or her belt and be like, how do you talk to these players? Because it's not any advice I can give you now. It's a long-term learning thing. People get masters in business and organizational and leadership so they know how to have these conversations with people. Yeah. So if you want to be a good manager, you got to read up, you got to be humble, you got to bring them in, you got to know that you're in a power hierarchy with them. You hold their scholarship in your hands. So when you're assessing before intervening, we get nervous. We don't want to have these conversations. We jump right in and say, look, I just got to tell you, your effort in practice has been really disappointing. We're doing sprints and you're the last one on the line. You know, you're here on a full ride and you're like acting like this is day camp. Like you can just say all kinds of stuff because you're nervous and you don't want to be having this conversation. And so it's really important that you regulate your anxiety. You understand how to have a crucial conversation. Some people talk about giving some good feedback on what you see as right. And then sort of saying like, also, I really appreciate this, this, and this about you. You know, I bring you in for 2 minutes and you change the game. Like, but if I gotta tell you something, I'm really confused, or I'm wondering, or I'm curious. I really am. I'm not just saying this to, you know, I'm curious. Like, why don't you run back and work harder on defense? Like, where does that come from? Like, is that how you played in high school? Like, is that was your last school that you transferred from? Like, you can kind of play a little bit Columbo, like you don't know. You can really just try to holster the guns, holster the hammer, and say, like, where does this come from and what have you been thinking and what have you been going through? Because for all you know, that person's depressed. Like, I'm not trying to make excuses for people, but people get depressed when they go to college, you know, and then the teammates are like, dude, like, you're dragging, you know, and then it sort of like reinforces this negative stuff that's going on inside of them. And so you want to give them the feedback, but you want to give them the pathway out. So like, what is it behaviorally that I need to see from you? Because again, that's the hallmark of a good manager and a good boss. This is what you're doing. I'm going to keep it behavioral. I'm not going to infer intent. I'm not going to call you lazy. I'm not going to say you think you're too big for this team. I'm just going to ask, because, sometimes people, I think laziness is a myth. I think there's stuff going on that makes it so that that's happening.
Yeah.
For all you know, they're hiding an injury. You never know. And so you're really just using this naive observer perspective of like, I don't know why you're doing this, and I would like to know why.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if they don't have a narrative and they can't really fill you in, you just say, like, I would like for you to stay curious about why it is that you do this. Your performance is really great in these areas, but the mental game of why you're sort of seemingly underperforming in these areas is a mystery. We need to keep trying to figure it out. So you're kind of aligning with them.
Yeah.
You're establishing yourself as someone who's in alliance with them instead of that antagonistic, one down parenting style of like, what are you doing? It's more of a like, let me come alongside you and treat you with respect. What do you think this is about? And then if you do have some behavioral benchmarks that you want to see from them, make it just like a job.
Mm-hmm.
You say, I want to see you run a 7-minute mile. I want to see you do this. And I want to see you do that. And I'm going to give you, basically without using the words, I'm going to give you a remediation plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
And let you know behaviorally what I need to see from you, instead of this like amorphous, like, I don't know, you just don't seem excited. Like you don't want to do that, because then people are like, oh, great. Like I have to be a cheerleader now. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Rachel. Welcome back.
Hey, you guys. Sorry, I have no idea how I lost you.
No problem. We're making the most of
Nice.
not being together. So
yeah, exactly.
Thanks for jumping back in. Thank you, Rhea. I think that it's just so consistent with all of these things. So much of it relates to how we're interacting with power and the power dynamics we have, and how we're not sitting above people, but sitting next to them and going alongside of them. So I think accountability, like you're saying, relates so much to that. And you guys have thrown out so many really, really helpful insights. And like you've said, Google's our friend. And like there's resources out there to keep diving in, which I think we're sparking, like through this conversation, you guys are saying so many things that spark all of our interest. So we have opportunity to keep learning, dive more in, even using the internet. So a couple more questions from our coaches. So these are relating to having hard conversations. So there's 2 questions here. They ask, how do you navigate the quote unquote, I'm feeling overwhelmed conversation? And then how do you have the conversation with your non-believing student athletes when they are going through a bad season in life, like family deaths, injuries, struggle with class, etc., and think and believe God is against them?
Well, the first one I can just say, and Rachel, please feel free to interrupt me, but I can just say for the first one, when I was training a lot of externs in their 20s who were PhD candidates, they would say they were overwhelmed. And what I learned is that in order to really validate their reality as someone who was now not an extern in school, I was now a staff psychologist, I had to take a natural history of their week. So if someone's having a breakdown and they're saying, I'm really overwhelmed, if you have the time during your office hours or availability, I would say, come in, let's talk about it. And then I would take a natural history of their week. Like literally it takes about 20 minutes, maybe 25 if you've got the time. You really want to map out from Monday to Sunday what this person is doing. Because I think some of us in some of our age cohorts have no idea what it is like to be in college anymore. Like when professors get on kids in class for eating in class, it's like, you have no idea, dude, right? Like one time, one of my teammates actually got in a car accident and we took her to the ER and we were up all night, and I was in class the next day. And because I was an athlete, I had to sit in the first 4 rows because that was part of my team mandate. And I had like my super bun going, and I was literally like in the first front rows, like going and dropping into micro sleeps. And the professor like completely publicly shamed me. I'll never forget it. He was so pissed, and he was just like, just because you're an athlete, you think you can do anything like that. And it was all because we had been up in the ER all night. Mm-hmm. And it's just like that whole thing again of like, you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't have time and you don't have bandwidth, say, let's talk about this Thursday at 3. I'm available then. And then my advice is literally just write out Monday through Sunday and take a history of their week and look at it. And then you've done the assessment to be like, wow, okay, so like, this is a lot. This is a lot. And you know what you're talking about. You're not just giving like a Hallmark card response.
Yeah.
And then from there, you can talk about time management strategies, going to see a counselor, validating the fact that, you know, yes, being an athlete in school while your mom has cancer, it's actually too much. It's more than any reasonable person can handle. So like, how can we get you buoyed up with other resources so that you aren't so overwhelmed? How can we get you, for me, it was a calculus tutor. You know, I needed a calculus tutor. It was the first time I ever needed a tutor in my life, but I was going to lose my eligibility. So I had to get one, and it worked. It's just the support that you can bring in as a coach from other resources, but it has to be a targeted intervention, not a pat response.
That makes sense. Yeah. Anything to add, Rachel, as well? And also in terms of, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about having conversations with, the question was, non-believing students who are going through bad season and think and believe
that God's against them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would just reiterate what Rhea said about the first question. My same thing was assessment and then intervene, in whatever practical way you can, teaming up people, and players, being able to provide for each other and be there with each other and study together. And, just the strategies that we've talked about, validation and active listening, work really well. And being able, like Rhea said, to find out the information before you figure out what it is that you're validating. Because I'm feeling overwhelmed, it's a common response, and yet it has very specific contributors based on the person, right? So if it's something in their personal life versus academic, like, you've got to figure out what it is first before you try to validate and problem solve and provide resources. And just to, you're really trying to get to the nature of what it means to be a Christian coach. Like, we all get overwhelmed. Like, I get it. Like, how can I help you? What do you think would help? Sometimes just having somebody to listen and validate you and say, like, what do you think would work? Like, besides obviously getting them resources, can be really helpful. The question about what do you tell a non-believing athlete when they think God is against them, that's a big challenge, right? First of all, we know that when people are going through hard times, spiritual conflict is actually really normal. It's extremely, extremely common. One of, the most significant outcomes when people experience trauma is that they have spiritual conflict. They cannot reconcile a good, loving, all-powerful God with a bad thing happening. So, if you're able to say, it's really hard to understand the concept of God and bad things happening in this world as like a starting point, like, that's great. Even like, if that's the only thing that you say is it's really hard to understand this concept of God as all loving and all powerful and gracious and caring about you, and the bad things that happen in the world, like, that's totally normal. So many people have a hard time grappling with that idea, right? So you just validate that conflict,
right? Because it's developmentally appropriate. It's developmentally
Yeah.
appropriate to move from either or to both and. And in the spiritual formation literature, in order for you to reach a new stage of understanding, a more nuanced, more personal, more integrated stage of understanding of God, your theology has to fall apart. You have to have the black and white, concrete, good or bad days of Sunday school fall apart around you. And nobody tells you that. There's like all these spiritual formation people who like know this, but like, we don't know this. Like, we're not taught this. It's like the fall apart, the things fall apart, that everything's not fitting together. This is not how I thought things would be. That's an actual chapter in spiritual formation that has to happen for you to mature into a different being that in the cocoon, you're liquefied, like that you are moving from one thing to another, and that you have to be challenged in these childlike thoughts and then mature through to a more adult understanding. Like, nobody prepares you for that. And so what Rachel's saying about mirroring back how difficult it is and being present to that and not trying to talk them back in to a childlike way of thinking and not trying to push them in to an adult way of spiritual formation, but let them be in that liminal state and mirror it back as a universal, understandable thing, while also being like, you know, really sensitive to the fact that this is a theological issue. And you can say that, like, people have different beliefs about why they're suffering and why people suffer. And then you get to speak from the heart and say, I don't think that bad things are happening to you because you're bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's my belief in my higher power, but I don't believe that.
Mm. Yeah.
And, you know,
and how freeing that can be. And I think, yeah, so many athletes aren't necessarily coming to their coaches to fix it. And right. I think if their coaches if we just try and fix it in that moment, sometimes we're putting a Band-Aid over something that's bigger that really needs patience and time and just support and care and validation and things like that. So yeah, it's a hard, really, really hard circumstance to be in. But having that like simple steps of mirroring and validation, I think help all of us be able to navigate that. So thank you guys. Last question here is, how do you know when you should go to a psychologist versus seeking the counsel of God?
That's a good question. You can do both. Yeah, I think it's really hard. Sometimes my instinct is to talk to people, and when I pray about it, I'm convicted and it needs to be just me sitting with God. Like, me going to talk to people is actually avoidance of the interaction with God that I need to have. And sometimes vice versa, you know, I'll take care of this on my own, ends up being a little bit of willfulness, whereas I need to have the humility to be an open book and be in connection around my suffering. You know, my general rule of thumb is don't suffer alone if you don't have to. You know, even the Trinity is in community.
Yeah.
Jesus didn't travel alone. He took 12 people with him. You know, if you can't decide whether or not it's time to go to a psychologist, my hope is that you have somebody that you trust that you can talk to about clinical issues for your team. And that if you could ask them, if I talk to you right now, is this confidential? If they say yes, you could be like, over the phone, do a 20 or 30-minute consultation and ask them, do you think I need therapy? You know, the hard part is finding someone good who's also a Christian.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. It's not even necessary. If you have something specific you need to work on, you could be helped tremendously by some new age loving, crystal hanging, non-God believing therapist. Like, you could be helped so much by them. So it's kind of like a plumber. If they know how to do it, they know how to do it. But on some issues where you feel like it's spiritual in nature and you really want to talk about God to somebody who doesn't look at you like you're, you know, simple for believing in God, then it's really the finding the person is the hard part. And then once you have that person and you're in relationship with that person, you can even call them and consult and be like, what do you think? Do you think that I actually need to come back in and do another round, you know? But if you don't know, you can just keep praying and keep talking to God about it. You can ask for direction and wisdom. And my experience is he'll usually give it to you. There'll be a gut feeling in your stomach that you can't run away from, aka the Holy Spirit, which will be telling you, like, it's time. You can't do this on your own. You got to be able to ask for help. And that feeling won't go away unless you make it go away. So it might be a process. The decision might not be clear. It might be a constant communication with God while you try and figure out which way to go.
I love that. That makes sense. And I think, yeah, there's a ton of truth to saying, are we running from, like, checking our motive? Am I running from God here by just seeking other people, but also understanding that God does use other people to also speak to us, to love us and comfort us and help us with the really challenging things in life. So I think that's great perspective. Yeah, Rachel, anything else to add? Otherwise, would love to hear from you guys. Any closing remarks Because yeah, that would be the last question from our coaches.
Well, I know it's biblical, right? That wise men seek counsel, right? And that, there's some verses about, there's a victory with counselors. Um, I am not someone who easily seeks out therapy. It's always a weird thing for a therapist to say. Um, so I like the rubric that it's like, if I'm seeking the counsel of God and I'm praying and I'm in contemplation and I'm talking to my support network and my friends and my community, if I have a spiritual mentor and I'm talking to them, but like there's still something that's on my heart that I can't figure out, or if I'm still angry about something, or I'm still nervous and scared or dealing with something really heavy, and it's not quite getting sorted out in my own life in the manner that I am able to, then I think it's time to seek out counseling.
And pray for the right counselor, to believe that
Exactly.
that's something God wants for you, even though there's a high stigma on mental health, sometimes even higher in churches, to believe that possibly seeking help is exactly how God's helping you.
Yeah.
That's hard to do.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's like I believe God speaks through people, sometimes even when they're not Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And so, take time and find the right person and follow that the spirit in you to a right counselor. And if that doesn't feel comfortable, ask for recommendations from whoever you could ask for recommendations from. Because word of mouth recommendations go far. They go very far.
Yeah.
But I think that's usually how I try to figure it out and what I say to people.
That makes sense. Yeah, thank you guys. Yeah, any other closing remarks for coaches? Your perspectives have been so helpful.
I just thank you guys for your ministry, for your work, for protecting these athletes, for caring, for bringing light into sometimes some pretty dark places, for being on the front lines, and don't forget to take care of yourself.
Absolutely. I love all y'all coaches. Like you're such an important part of the world.
Yeah.
And again, I have my sweet son, and I just like when he has a good coach, it means more than anything to me. It's so comforting. And so, I'm sure you're all doing great. Just the fact that you're doing this and participating in all of this, it already says so much about your character. But, reach out, email us, let us know if we can support you in any way. And, best wishes to you all, especially as you start to head into, new school years and new seasons, given everything going on in the world. So we're thinking of you and praying for you, and we wish you the best.
So good. Thank you guys so much. So for coaches listening, Rhea and Rachel have been so generous to be willing to share their emails with you guys. So if you have any follow-up questions, we'll share their emails and you can reach out directly to them. Because obviously they have so much wisdom and insight and really healthy perspective. So we're grateful to be able to have your time. You've been so generous with your time. So thank you guys. And I'm excited to see, takeaways from our coaches and ways that God's bringing things up through these conversations.